Well, here we are in St. James in the nave of our dear church, and we're going to talk about the 29 windows that we have in this sanctuary. I'm standing in the part of the church that's called the chancel or the choir. I'm standing behind the altar. Please know that the altar was not always a freestanding altar. It used to be right here where I am standing at the back of the church. And my son, who was an acolyte here in the 1970s, says he remembers helping to pick up the altar and move it out where it is presently. I think that's probably correct. Let's talk about the east window, or the great east window. It depicts, oh, by the way, I do want to say that the whole theme of the stained glass windows in this sanctuary is telling the story of God and what God came down to earth to do. So he came to earth as the Good Shepherd. Here he is as the Good Shepherd. There he is with his staff and holding one of the sheep, which are his people and his charge. This, by the way, is a window, the central piece, given by the James family, and there's still a connection with the Bennevilles. There's a lot of continuity going on at this church. So early on in Jesus' career, the mother of these two boys, St. John and St. James, came to Jesus and asked that these two could sit on either side as he did his ministry. They were known as the Sons of Thunder. Perhaps they weren't very easy to get along with, but they were very vocal and they were friends of Jesus. And they traveled with, after his crucifixion and his time of going back to heaven, they traveled throughout the world preaching the gospel and bringing the good news thereof. Here is St. John, and he has his quill pen and his book. He is credited with writing 3 parts of the New Testament, the book of Revelations, and the great Gospel of John. On this side, we've got St. James. He is St. James the Greater. He was one of the original apostles. And he is credited with traveling to Spain and preaching the gospel there. He was a pilgrim. And today, you can see it's indicated that he's the pilgrim because there is his staff and his, what they call a wallet, which is a sort of a knapsack up there hanging from the top of the staff, which he would have little items for traveling inside. And if you want to make a pilgrimage today, one of the things that you can do is to walk the Camino de Santiago, which is across the top of Spain. East to west, the town of Compostela, where you would end up, is the burial spot for the bones of St. James, this apostle and this evangelist of Jesus Christ. So this together I'm calling one window, and it wasn't always adjacent. There used to be a separation here and here between the 3 panels with different windows included in it. And again about the colors, green indicates copper, red indicates iron, and blue indicates cobalt. And this melding, which shows up so beautifully when the sun is really bright through here and casts pretty shadows, which looks like the nacre of a seashell. The inside of a seashell is frequently those variegated colors. If you've ever seen an abalone shell, it comes from the West Coast, or simply a mussel shell that comes out of the streams around here, you see that color. That's a mixture of colors, and sometimes it's not included in the glass as it warms. Glass comes from sand, by the way, and the original color was brown, which is an oxide of iron, which was in the sand at that time, and still is. But anyway, the mixture was painted on the outside, not put in the glass as it heated. So that's why it has that very nice effect, what I call opalescent. So that's the east window, the great east window. Okay, here's the great west window, which is, I think, undeniably the most spectacular window in the church. I'm calling it one window, although it has 5 separate panels. And the window begins with this angel in the middle, proclaiming that here we have the King of Kings, Jesus Christ above. And you see him holding an orb. That orb is the world. King of Kings, Lord of Lords, forever and ever. Do you recognize that as Handel's Messiah? The idea came before Handel, but Handel incorporated it in his great music. So there is the angel of the Lord himself, King of Kings, surrounded by the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Let's talk about the evangelists. Matthew wrote for the Jewish Christians. Matthew, writing for the Jewish Christians. At the top, you see an angel, and below you see the angel telling Matthew what to write. He also is telling you that Jesus descended from the house of David. That's in this. So the symbol for this panel and for Matthew is mankind at the top, writing for the Jewish Christians. Next is Saint Mark, who wrote for the Roman Christians, the Italian Christians. And there you see Saint Mark in the middle. And because he liked to emphasize the aspect of Jesus, King of Kings, the lion, who symbolizes the king, is in the very top panel. And below, you see Saint Mark talking to the one who helped him evangelize at this point, and that would have been Peter. Then you skip over the picture devoted to Jesus, King of Kings, and you come to Luke. Now, Luke wrote for the Greek Christians, and they like the idea of Jesus as Savior. So their symbol is the sacrificial ox, which they would sacrifice plenty of. And then below you see a picture of Luke crucified to a tree. Why that was chosen, I'm not sure, except that was his fate. Then finally you have John. And remember, John was up there on the east window, and here he is in the west window. He wrote for all Christians everywhere on the earth. Therefore, his symbol is the eagle that flies over the world. And below, you see him telling the story of the Nativity. So this is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 evangelists around Jesus the King in the middle, the great west window. I'm now on the south side of the sanctuary, where you'll find the Old Testament windows. There are 6 of them. So this is the first of the Old Testament windows. And here we see the story of Noah, his wife Naamah, and the flood. God, the dove above, below, Noah and Naamah on dry land, sacrificing sheep in gratitude. And then below, the hand of God right here, directing Noah in how to build the ark. And the dove is coming back with a branch, making them know for sure that the earth is once again dry. God is reassuring Noah and Naomi with an ark in the sky. The ark of the rainbow, it's a covenant, a promise to God that there will be seed time and harvest time from now on. And then, as I said, the hand of God directing Noah in how to build that ark. Oh, and why was the flood caused? Because man was sinning. And God was very upset with this fact. So this is why he decided to destroy mankind. Then we come to the second window of the Old Testament side of the building. I'm inching up on it. And here it is, just as winning. This shows the picture of Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt to freedom. And it shows him with what looked like horns. That was a mistake. In the Vulgate Bible, they depicted Moses frequently with something that looked like horns, but it actually meant to shine. So it's a shining that accompanied Moses wherever he went. And here is God handing down the tablets with the 10 Commandments. At the top, you have the burning bush, which is the way that God first appeared to Moses, in the burning bush. And here below, the first miracle in the Old Testament, Moses leading the Israelites through the Red Sea, and here is the parting of the Red Sea. All comes together. Man's still sinning, by the way. God's still very unhappy with the situation. Now I'm inching back again, or feeding back again, to the third picture. And this is the story of a sacrifice. This is the story of Abraham and Sarah, who were childless. Well, the angel of the Lord comes to them and says, "You will have a son." And they laugh because they're so old. They don't think this is at all possible. But it was possible. And they did have a son, Isaac. But God, for some reason, tested Abraham and said, "I want you to sacrifice that son." So Abraham makes all the preparations, and almost as the point of doing that, you see the drawn knife here. When the angel of the Lord comes back and says, "No, stop. We're going to sacrifice a lamb instead. You may keep your son, and I'm going to multiply your seed like the stars of heaven." So he was one of the father of many tribes. And there at the top, you have a sacrificial burning, and when the smoke goes straight up, that means that God is accepting and pleased. So that's the story of Abraham and Sarah and their production of more Israelites. Then I'm backing up again to my favorite window. Everybody in here has a favorite window. Everybody in the congregation, I'm sure. And this is the story of Ruth. There's a whole book in the Bible about Ruth. And here she is, Ruth, with Naomi, her mother-in-law, and they are returning to Israel or Bethlehem, from Moab, where they went to live. When they got there, Ruth, the Moabite, married one of Naomi's sons. She had 2 sons, both married there, and her husband was there. These men died. So Naomi decided to return to Israel. But she said, "You daughters-in-law, stay behind." And Ruth said to her mother-in-law, "No, whither thou go, I goest. Thy God shall be my God, thy people my people." She came back to Israel with Naomi. And while she was gathering wheat in a field, gleaning wheat, they say, she met Boaz. They married, and they produced a son named Obed, who sired a son named Jesse, who sired a son named David. And this is the line from which we get Jesus. He was in that line of succession, all thanks to Ruth. And I think that's a charming window because it shows a nice relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. So finally, we come to the last of the Old Testament windows, And this is the story of, I'm sorry, we're not the last, we're the next to the last. This is David, King David, also a world-class sinner. But he was a favorite of God. And he was given directions to build a temple, and he had his son Solomon build it. And here they are planning. There are the blueprints. There's the little architectural tool that they make the plans with. Up at the top, you see the Tower of Babel, and that is the attempt of the people of God to reach the heavens and to talk to God. So this is King David, his son Solomon, and this is the building of the temple, also directed by the hand of God. You know the story of the temple. It was burned once more because of the sins of this man called King David, who, by the way, was the same David that slew Goliath. And then finally, the sixth and last picture of the Old Testament on this south wall. Here we come to the story of Isaiah, the prophet, the seer, the mystic, the visionary. Here he is kneeling, and he's writing his biblical chapter, I suppose. Here is Jesus, and here is Jesus as a baby. Here is the acceptable story of offering the smoke and fire going straight up to God. You have this insignia or chrismon here, INRI, which means Jesus Nazareth Rex Juden, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And at the bottom you have one of Isaiah's visions represented as the birth of the Christ child, the Messiah, and his mother Mary. That's the last of the Old Testament windows. As we pass along toward the New Testament windows on the north side of the sanctuary, I'm going to make a stop at the baptistry window. It shows John the Baptist baptizing Jesus. Above, the Spirit of God, the Holy Ghost, as a dove. At the bottom, St. Philip, baptizing a man from Ethiopia, the queen's tax collector. Who was the queen at that time? Her name was Candace, and she was an ancestor of the queen of Sheba of Ethiopia. Getting a little tongue-tied here. And a lot of people ask who this is. This is St. Anne, the mother of Mary. And now we'll proceed to the New Testament windows. Maybe I'll try walking forward here a little bit easier. So this is the nativity window, obviously. Here is Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus, and an ass and an ox looking a little bit skeptical according to the booklet that I have. Not too pleased with the crowded conditions in their stalls. Then up above we have the Star of the East, which drew the three wise men in the direction of baby Jesus. And below we have a picture of the Annunciation, Gabriel announcing to Mary that she would bear this baby, this miracle baby, Jesus. So that's the whole story there. It's a lovely window. By the way, the faces in these windows were not done by the same person who did the whole coloring and execution of putting the lead between the various colored glass. It was done by a separate individual. And in this case, Carl Mueller had set 12 people working in his studio, and probably the one named Sittler was the one who did the faces for these panels. Now on to the second window, the New Testament window. We have the miracle at Cana, the first miracle in the New Testament, where Jesus is directing one of his people under the eye of Mary and helpers to make wine from water. Up above, you see the grapes, which were responsible for the wine, so that's a symbol of this window. And at the bottom, you see the loaves and the fishes, which Jesus multiplied and dispensed to thousands of people. The first miracle of the New Testament. And it's just opposite from the first miracle of the Old Testament, Moses parting the Red Sea. Then we walk on to the window of, I call it the communion window, but it is the Last Supper window. Here is Jesus preparing the wine, and I guess the bread maybe already have been delivered. The disciples watching his every move. At the very top, you have the theme or the symbol for this window, and that's the chalice, which they're still looking for today. All figures into the Arthurian legend. Where is that chalice? And then at the bottom, Peter getting his feet washed by Jesus. And I think this must be John. He's often depicted as a blonde, long hair. But anyway, Jesus is washing John's feet, and John says, no, you can't do that. Well, Jesus tells him, if I can't do it, then you will have no part of me. But we know that finally he relented, and he did become the rock on which the Christian faith was built, starting in Rome. So on to the next New Testament window, and here we have the well-known crucifixion window. No mistaking what this is. Jesus on the cross, John and Mary accompanying him, his dear family. At the top, that's the scourge, the reed, and the post where Jesus was tortured before he was crucified. And here you have at the bottom, Simon of Cyrene helping Jesus carry the cross to Golgotha, or the hill of the skull, for the crucifixion. A memorable window. On to the next window. This is the picture called the resurrection window. And here is Jesus appearing from the tomb, which had been sealed, with holding the banner of the church. The guards that are guarding the tomb have fallen asleep. Above, you see the phoenix. From the fiery ashes comes new life. That's the symbol of the phoenix. And at the bottom, Jesus with the banner of the church talking to Mary, who does not recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener. She doesn't realize he's her grown, very own son. So this is the resurrection window. Then on to the final window on the New Testament side of the church. We have the apostles and Mary and the dove, the Spirit, and the Spirit is pouring, you see little sparks of fire on the people that will follow Jesus in spirit. And then below, St. Peter preaching his first sermon at the bottom of the picture. So this is, what would you call this window? There is a name for it, and I forget it right now. Sorry about that. And with that, we're going on up to the north side of the choir, and we have a little story to tell there.